Yeah, so we're live. So welcome, guys. Welcome everybody to Critical African Thinkers. So today we are going to be having a conversation with Bob Woodson, who is the president of the Woodson Center, and we're going to be exploring um, the topic of what defines America. Is it is it oppression? Is it slavery? Is it the negatives of America that defines it, or is it the promise that America holds? I mean, everybody has at one point or the other heard of the term the American dream. So when you look at America, if from within and from outside, what truly defines it? Even though those of us from the outside, when we look at the media, at times what we see as what defines America is racial tensions. What we see is black and white. What we see is liberal versus conservative. What we see is Republican versus Democrats. But I don't think those are the actual things that define everyday Americans. So hopefully we're going to be able to explore that today and see what exactly defines America and why we should take either of both positions. So Bob is still not here, but I think we should just go ahead and start this live stream. If he does come around, we're going to go ahead with that conversation. But prior to then, let's give it 10 to 15 minutes. If it doesn't come, then we'll just flow with the conversation that we're currently having. So, hi, Steve. Hi, Chloe. How you guys doing?
Doing good.
Yeah, I'm good. Doing good. Getting ready
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah.
Thanksgiving.
We're seeing Chloe in the flesh for the first time, even though we are all Chloe and we've all seen Chloe because we're all Chloe. But
It's all for Bob.
we're,
He's dying.
we're,
No.
we're, we're seeing the original for the first time, and it's good to see you in person. So,
Yeah,
Absolutely.
as this Ahmad Habri case, has it been concluded?
I
Um,
believe so.
yeah, they came down with a verdict, but I think they still have to do sentencing.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
so in some
I think
places they're broken up into two parts. One is like the jury gets to deliberate and give their decision, and then if I remember correctly, some places the jury decides the punishment, and then other places the jury is excused, and then the judge decides what the sentence should be.
oh,
So I'm a little bit confused about that, but I mean,
so it differs from state to state. That's what you mean.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I'm no legal expert by any means, but it seems like that's kind of how it is from place to place. It's just kind of weird.
So
Yeah.
let's go with this. Let's go with this. I think were there not three people involved in this case, and the verdict, is it affecting the three of them or just the person who pulled the trigger?
All three of them are guilty.
Yeah.
All three
I,
of
I
them.
I believe that they're each of the three. They have like what 7 counts against them. One of them has all of guilty on all of them. This another one only has one count that he's not guilty on. I think it was the um, like malicious murder. And then the last guy, I think the one who's not related to the other two, there are 3 counts that he was found not guilty on. So, but the vast majority of them, I mean, like they're like found guilty on probably the important ones, you know. So
Yeah. So looking at this, the jury deliberated for about 10 hours before convicting Greg McMichael, son Travis McMichael, and neighbor William Roddy Bryan, who all face minimum sentences of life in prison. It is up to the judge to decide whether that comes with or without the possibility of parole. So, yeah.
yeah,
So what do you
so
think about the verdict?
I believe it was the correct one, and
Um, I agree.
What
and
happened to white supremacy this time?
or like a
Taking a
racist
break
justice system or
from
something.
it's taking a break from the Kyle Rittenhouse
Oh, so
saga.
it was to balance out the Kyle Rittenhouse one or something like that. You get one, I get one type of thing. But
No, it's
I
it's
mean,
it's possible. It's possible. I mean, they might not want to show themselves to be too
yeah,
Steve. Is it possible? It's okay. we're giving them one today, and we're taking.
Well, yeah. So you're giving one kid, and then you're taking three.
Well, the funny thing about Kyle Rittenhouse, though, and I hate to say it's the funny thing, but they say this is a case of white supremacy. It's like, if he's a white supremacist, he's the worst white supremacist because all he did was shoot 3 white guys.
Yeah.
Like, you're the worst white
so
supremacist in the history of white supremacy, Kyle. Come on now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, four attackers, 4 people attacked him, I think, physically. One was like, and the only only attacker that he didn't hit was the black one. So he only hit all the white ones. He hit the white ones only.
Yeah.
But I think we were kind of discussing this earlier, but it's just very interesting of how people are going to make it black and white as to who supported who. And so, like, because I was watching the legal commentary of, literally a panel of judges, or not judges, but lawyers, right? Lawyers from who were prosecutors, lawyers who were in criminal justice, who did criminal law, civil law, patent law. He specialized in, defense with firearms. All of these different types of lawyers were looking at this case and looking at the facts of the matter. They're like, yeah, Kyle should get off. But then the moment they looked at, these, the people in the Arbery case, they're like, yeah, those people are guilty. And so I think no one's really acknowledging that there are people who can hold both opinions, right? That Kyle is innocent, and then the men who killed Arbery are guilty. And they're trying to make it as if those 2 sides can never coexist in a single person, because they have to have the narrative of white supremacy. Because if you are really a white supremacist, you have to support both of them or none of them, right? It's either with us or against us. And the fact that the law and also the facts of the matter are more nuanced, no one is really acknowledging that that's what people are looking at. Instead, they have to supplant or project an opinion of white supremacists.
See that right there, project. That right there. I think that's the most profound thing that you just said right there, was they have to project their own beliefs onto things that really shouldn't exist in that space. Like, we should be looking at this from a purely factual based, looking at the nuance, looking at the conversation, looking at the facts of the case. But instead, you have people, like Michael Eric Dyson, who project racism through black voices, through racialized black voices, and that, that's the kind of the bummer that happens with all this kind of stuff, is you get these situations where these people who really kind of project race and racism, they will do it at any cost. And, to example that, Michael Eric Dyson said that, okay, well, we've got we had a racialized black woman elected into the lieutenant governorship in Virginia, right? But then he goes on to say that she's the mouthpiece of white supremacy. It's just, what?
Yeah, same thing with Larry Elder.
Like, how
right?
that is the most racist ass thing you could say, coming from a racialized black man who knows better. Michael Eric Dyson is not an idiot. He is not a fool. He's a very intelligent person. And for him to say that, it almost begs the question, is he ideologically possessed by the fact that everything has to be about race, versus some things can be about race? Absolutely, sure. But that, come on,
she's not the right black type.
Yeah,
she's not the right type of black woman. Right?
Yeah, she's not
there's
right.
There's only one legitimate type, right?
Right.
And this was kind of based off a discussion I had with someone, I think yesterday, and it's kind of like this idea of, I think the discussion was about welfare, right? And how, in terms of numbers, pure numbers, more white people are within the welfare program than racialized black people, right? So, the person was questioning, is like, so why are white people acting against their own interests if they're against welfare? If they actually, aren't fully supporting welfare, they're against their own interests. And the thing is that's an example of a type of projection, right? Because it assumes that all white people are motivated by, you know, like racial unity, right? And they're not, the individuals are not motivated by other things. And so by saying, oh well, in my theory they all should be motivated by promoting things that quote unquote help white people, therefore they should support welfare. They don't support welfare, therefore they're you know, they're not acting in their own best interests. Well, you're assuming their best interest is to promote, you know, is to help other white people, right?
Right.
But that just means that your calculation of how they operate, of what they're motivated by, is wrong. It's not motivated by, you know, just blanketly doing things for white people. They're probably motivated by economics or something, or their understanding of economics. And so even though something might appear to be bad for them, they might be motivated by something else in which doing this one thing would be good for their cause. And so it just means that your model of this other person's or these other people's you know, minds is just wrong. And you can't just say like, well, I think that this should be their motivation, but they're acting against this motivation that I've given them, therefore
Right.
they're acting wrong. But you've never established that that is really what it is. And so I think we have to, like, when things just don't line up, we have to acknowledge that maybe the original hypothesis is wrong, instead of just trying to weave the narrative in a way to fill in the plot hole
Yeah.
as to this is how it makes sense, right? And
Yeah.
we've all seen franchises which have like horrible plot holes that they try to like retroactively fill in, and the whole thing just becomes a mess, and then people
Yeah.
stop being invested, and then whatever. And so it just it's I think it feels like it's becoming that, because the more that we are confronted with things that don't fit the narrative, like the guilty verdicts in the Ahmaud Arbery case, that didn't fit the narrative, so they have to fill in that plot hole. The facts of the Kyle Rittenhouse case didn't really fit the narrative, so they have to either lie or paper mache over the plot holes with something else,
Or
like,
project over it.
or project or lies and all that
I
kind of
think
stuff.
I think Kyle is a traitor to white supremacy. He
Oh yeah,
betrayed us.
he really
They
is
sent
the
him out
worst.
to do a job, and he ended up killing white people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like going back to the Kyle case. It's interesting seeing people realize for the first time that he actually never killed any black people. Like, they just believed this whole time that he killed a bunch of black people, and that's why he's on trial. And it's like, oh wait, he actually didn't kill any black people. And actually, if you just look at the
Seriously,
footage,
there are people out there who believed. There are
yes, they
people out there
believe
who
that.
believed he killed black people.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, this is the first time they're finding out he didn't.
Yeah. Well, and you know, the other thing too about that is that
Oh,
going back to
gosh.
what you were saying, and I think this deserves some type of dialogue here, is that, you know, I don't want to go back to Michael Eric Dyson too much here, because that's not even the point. But my point is along with what Chloe is saying, where there has to be this level of projection, right? And Kyle stating that he supports BLM and he supports the protests. What you find is that when people like Michael Eric Dyson are saying that Lieutenant Governor Winsome is the mouthpiece for white supremacy, let's break that apart for a second. What he's basically saying is that she's talking like the white people like, right? I don't know anybody that. Okay, so let me put this out there. I'm gonna throw this thought process out there and see if I'm right. Let's say you got a white guy, and he's sitting there and he's listening to a racialized black guy talk, and he's like, I like how that guy thinks. He agrees with me, right? Well, people like Michael Eric Dyson are going to say, well, that's because they're a mouthpiece for racism. They're a mouthpiece for white supremacy. And so we should ignore those black voices. But the problem is that's actually, as far as I can tell right now, just thinking this out, is like, that's actually proof that racism does not exist in that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're finding that a racialized white person is agreeing with the ideas that a racialized black person is thinking, and they're meeting together on those ideas rather than the skin color.
Yeah,
It's almost like a disapproval or a factual analysis and disproving of the narrative that black people are the white voices
it's almost
because they agree with us.
It's almost like the white person is judging a person by their character instead of their skin tone. Weird. Right. And again, yeah, so and also embedded in what Dyson is saying, right, is that to be a true black person, to speak to a white person, the white person has to you are truly black when white people inherently hate what you say. Right? Like if you're truly speaking from blackness, it should inherently conflict with the white person's whiteness. And that's how you know you're in the right place, right? In terms of your racial identity. And so that kind of really invests in basically the racial tensions, like the conflict, right? He's heavily invested in white and black being diametrically opposed and to never actually have any reconciliation.
Well, that begs the question then is that I always get nervous talking about this particular thing. It's like there was a tweet that I saw a while ago, and it said basically, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was like, if you need a race war, then it's you that needs a race war, not everybody else. Right? I'll find the tweet because I know I actually saved it in my phone because it was a very it was a very interesting.
Bob is coming in right now.
Oh, guys, fantastic!
Bob is coming in right now, so let me add him to the stream.
Hello.
Hi, Bob Woodson.
Hi.
Hello, Mr. Woodson.
How are you? I'm sorry I'm late, or I don't know, technology.
You're a busier man than we are, man. No, don't even worry about it.
Sitting waiting for. I was on waiting, push some buttons anyway.
Wow, we are so excited to have you here on the stream.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I put a nice shirt on.
Okay, so
I showed my face.
Yeah, Chloe showed her face today. So let's. Yeah.
Let me.
So this is Critical African Thinkers. So this is Critical African.
Can you hear us?
Much better. Yeah, I can hear you now. I can actually hear you now. I don't have to pretend to hear you. Okay.
All right. So this is Critical African Thinkers, and this is the Critical African Thinkers community where we examine everything. We like to x-ray every idea under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today we'd like to discuss with you a very present topic, which is what defines America. I went through some of your videos, some of the interviews that you've given, and that was what inspired me to come up with this topic. What defines America? Is it its oppression, its history of oppression, principally slavery, or is it the promise that America holds? Because when I look at America, I'm from Africa. I'm currently in Nigeria, Africa, but I follow a lot of things that happen in America. When I look at America, what I see as what defines it at times is the racial tensions from the media. It's black versus white. It's liberal versus conservative. It's Democrat versus Republican. And currently, the debate, is it slavery that defines America? Is it the history of oppression that defines America? Or the American dream, which almost everyone has heard of all around the globe? People in Africa want to chase that American dream. So is that part of what defines America, or is that what defines America? So those are the things that we're going to be exploring today. But before we go into that, Chloe, could you just do us the honor of introducing Bob Woodson to us for those who do not know? I know everybody here, most people here know about him. So, but just do the honor of introducing him to us.
Yeah. We're very proud to welcome Bob Woodson to Critical African Thinkers. Bob Woodson is a civil rights veteran. He served as the director of the Administration of Justice Division for the National Urban League in New York City. He was a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And in 1981, Woodson founded the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise in Washington, D.C., which was renamed the Woodson Center in 2016. And Woodson's most recent endeavor is the 1776 Unites, which began as a response to the 1619 Project. While the 1619 Project, headed by Nicole-Hannah Jones of the New York Times, sought to tie the birth of the United States to the first arrival of African slaves to the English colonies as the true beginning of the United States, the 1776 Unites Project, in contrast, seeks to highlight the self-determination and true promise of the potential of America as told through the wider view of the history of African Americans in this country. So yeah, we were very excited and honored to have someone so accomplished and wise to join us. And if I missed anything, please add it.
Well, he also has two honorary doctorates.
That's more than enough.
Oh, that's fantastic. So thank you, Mr. Woodson, for coming to the stream today. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, in one of the videos you talked about America being a melting pot of different peoples, different cultures, different civilizations. Yet when I look at America, at times, even without seeing who is speaking, from the voice, I can almost tell if this person is a racialized Black person, if this person is a racialized white person. You don't get to see that with places like maybe places like the UK, where almost everybody sounds alike. So in that regard, how well would you say that African Americans have been integrated into the American system, into the greater American system?
Well, first of all, I think thanks for inviting me. As a veteran of the civil rights movement, I was born in segregation, so I know what life was like. I was born in 1937 in the midst of a small Black community in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The North was segregated as well. We didn't have this kind of virulent segregation that you had in the South, but nevertheless, it was separate, even during the time of segregation and Jim Crow. In the small, low-income community where I was born, all households had a man and a woman raising children. In all the years from K through 12, I never heard a gun go off in my community. I never heard of an elderly person being mugged or assaulted in my community. And so the kind of challenges that we're witnessing today over the last 10 years is not the America that I grew up in. This is something that has happened recently. And that's why we challenged 1619 when the naysayers said there are two ways of looking at a situation. I happen to be a Christian. There are those who are crucifixionists. All they see is crucifixion, slavery, Jim Crow, and they define their life by disadvantage or confusion or oppression. And then you got people on the right who only define life in terms of resurrection and ignore the crucifixion. Well, we should be a colorblind society, move on. And I come in the middle. I believe there was crucifixion, but there's also resurrection. That's the complete story of America. None of us, whether an individual, an organization, should be defined by the worst of what we were. America is a land of redemption. There is a joke that I tell about a farmer coming to a stream, taking his mule to market, and it's 3 feet high, rushing along at 25 miles an hour. And he forces the mule in, and they both swept a mile down the shore. The next year he comes to the same crossing, only this time the stream is only 6 inches. But the mule refuses to go on because the mule has good memory but poor judgment. Many of us are like that. America is not what it used to be. America is in the process of becoming. But you have powerful forces in America who resist this, who are doing everything they can to undermine the institutions, and so they are using Black America as a pawn. They're using Black America, particularly low-income Black America, as a pawn to really bludgeon this country. And that's what we're pushing back against.
Thank you very much for that response. So I'd like you to comment on what has changed. The pre-1960s Black community and what we have now. What has changed in terms of economics? What has changed in terms of behavior? And what are the possible causes for those drastic changes that we're seeing currently?
First of all, when we did our research, someone said that we must have truth-based facts or lies become normal. And so what we try to present in our essays is the real picture of Black America. Black America was never defined by slavery or discrimination. And I really think that 1619 was correct in that America has not really told the true story of slavery. And about that, I agree with that. But we should not substitute one revisionist form of history with another revisionist form of history. We must tell the truth. And what we do in our essays, we look at oppression, but we look at resilience too. And the fact is that one of our scholars examined the records of 6 major plantations to find out what was the state of the slave family. They found that 75% of all slave families had a man and a woman raising children. The nuclear family lasted for 100 years. Up until 1965, 85% of all households had a man and a woman raising children. During the 10 years of the Depression, between 1930 and 1940, when the unemployment rate was 25% among whites, it was 40% with Blacks. When racism was enshrined in law, Blacks had no political representation. They were being lynched. Even in the face of these treacherous circumstances, Black America had the highest marriage rate of any group in society. Our Christian faith really shielded us from the kind of internal decay. Elderly people could walk safely in those communities, and children could be safe in their cribs. So what you're witnessing today, the carnage of 70% out of wedlock birth, the hemorrhage of murders that are occurring. More Blacks are killed by other Blacks in 1 year than was killed in 45 years of the Klan. And so these are some troubling facts that we must confront. We can't improve a situation if we can't know the truth of the situation. But there are those today, and a lot of people in the mainstream media keep up this lie that somehow Black America, that the problems of out of wedlock birth and unemployment and whatnot are a legacy of slavery and discrimination. That is a lie. I'll give you just some examples. There are 5 Black high schools at the turn of the century. Dunbar High School in DC. There was a New York, Boston, New York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, New Orleans. They had overcrowded classrooms, crumbling buildings, half the budgets of white schools, used textbooks. Every one of those Black high schools outtested every white school in those major urban areas. Today, those schools have been run by Black political leaders for the last 50 years. And some of those schools, only about 20% of the students are reading at grade level. Explain to me why, in the face of Jim Crow and discrimination under those horrific situations, that our kids perform but they're not performing today. You see, a lot of people don't want that kind of discussion. So we say, oh, it's institutional racism, systemic racism, microaggression. I don't even know what the hell that is. But it's a nice way of avoiding having to answer the questions that I just posed. I can sit here all day and give you economic development. Chicago, Illinois, 1929. In the Bronzeville section of Chicago, there were 731 Black-owned businesses. We had 100 million in real estate assets at a time when we were being redlined. The out-of-wedlock birth was under 12%. Durham, North Carolina, the same. The Greenwood section of Tulsa. In other words, when white people were at their worst, we were at our best. But this is a part of our history that progressive left people are trying to prevent young people from knowing. Instead, they ignore our ability to achieve against the odds strategies of resilience. There were 20 Blacks who were born slaves who died millionaires. 2 of them purchased a plantation on which they were slaves. One of them took in the impoverished slave family as an act of radical grace. I'm not denying that oppression wasn't real, but we should never be defined by the worst of who we were. That's all I'm saying. Let's just tell a complete story.
Okay. So my next question will be, you seem to suggest that the liberal social scientists designed a way to get fathers out of the households, and that
Yes,
has
sir.
led to a lot of pathologies. So what is the issue? What issues do they really have with fathers being in the house? What is their end game? Why fathers in particular? Why didn't they want to target mothers? What's the end game behind them targeting fathers specifically?
If you go read the works of Cloud and Piven, these were 2 social scientists at the Columbia University School of Social Work. They were socialists. They said that we need to promote socialism in America. And the way you do that, this is right after the Watch riot, that we need to really entice millions of Blacks into the welfare system, because welfare was stigmatized in the Black community. So the first thing they had to do was remove the stigma to it. So they redefined it as social insurance and then reparations. But they couldn't just do this by issuing paper. The Black Panther Party and the Black also aided and abetted this by saying that the nuclear family was Eurocentric and therefore racist. The women's movement also chimed in because they were anti-male, and so they wanted to make the father redundant. So they said, if you can separate work from income, you'll have children dropping out of school, violence would follow, all of the pathologies that you see now will occur. But the government stepped in, the poverty programs, and opened offices all over major cities and offered generous welfare programs and separated. And so that was the final blow. And then when you see that, that's when the men became redundant and the out of wedlock birth soared to the point we're in now. In other words, social policies of the 60s, we spent $22 trillion on poverty programs. That's more money than it would cost to buy all of the agricultural land in America, more money than we spent fighting all of our wars. But 70 cents of every dollar did not go to the poor. They went to those who served the poor. They asked which problems are fundable, not which ones are solvable. And so we empowered a professional class that made up primarily a large numbers of professional Blacks, that their careers depended upon having another class of Blacks to serve. So you're talking about systemic racism. That's systemic perversion, economic incentives. That if my job, if my career and my income depends upon you being poor, what incentives do I have to make you not poor? I don't care how compassionate you are. If your strategic interest is hostile to my strategic interest, that's a setup for failure. But we don't want to talk. And so that is why we're in the mess that we're in today. If racism,
Okay.
let me
So
just
I'll
pose,
just
since you're Nigerian, right?
yes, I am.
If racism were the culprit, explain to me why Nigerians are underrepresented in prison and overrepresented in the top tier of the economy. Nigerians make more money than white Americans. They're better educated. Same with Black Caribbeans of descent. If racism were the single culprit, what exempts Africans who come here and achieve? White people don't know the difference between you and me.
Well, I'd like to confirm what Mr. Woodson is saying. There is I've done quite a bit of research on this myself. Is that when you have first and second generation immigrants come here from any country, really, they statistically they do better than everybody else of their same racial background, and it drops off more consistently as that family has been in the United States longer and longer. But what I think Mr. Woodson is speaking to is that if racism did exist, then why aren't these people that are coming from other countries suffering the same pitfalls as the people that have been here for generations and generations? It doesn't make sense to say that racism is the problem.
And to add to that point, if when talking about the Caribbean, I would say that, the more slaves were sent to South America and the Caribbean than even the United States. So they, have definitely also experienced a history of slavery as well as being Black. And when they come to the United States, apparently that doesn't, that also doesn't hinder them if that theory is based in reality at all. It's kind of disproven just by that fact.
But even like you were saying, Nigerians and those same Jews are underrepresented in prison. If the criminal justice system were racist, wouldn't you expect to see more Jews and all Blacks in there? Even the Black prison population, if you look back at the turn of the century up until the 1960s, even though we were 13% of the population, our prison population was only 25%. And that shot up in the 60s. So are you telling me between the turn of the century and 1960, white people were less racist then in jury segregation?
Yeah, and Thomas Sowell spoke to this in his book, Black Liberals and White, or well, no, it was Black Rednecks and White Liberals.
Black rednecks.
Yeah, and he spoke to the same thing, but it seems like that while he did give a couple of examples of why that may have existed, I'm kind of curious as to why you believe that actually perpetuated after the Civil Rights era, where you had better divorce rates pre-1965. You had better graduation rates. You had better rates of individuals from racialized communities going to colleges. They were doing better in every single metric. What was it that was so specific about the civil rights? The family. No, but what caused that, though?
Okay, I just told you. If you look at, I've written about this in a paper at Harvard, where I gave the documentation of this thing. But I'll tell you about Cloud and Piven. Between Fred Siegel's book, The Future Once Happened Here, from the Manhattan Institute, he has some of the best numbers on that within a short period of time of that 60s, where they separated work from income, and the out of wedlock births just soared during that period, and the fathers left and that's when you saw this decline occur. that, and also urban renewal was another factor that destabilized. See, I left the civil rights movement in the mid-60s on the issue of force busing for integration. That was the worst decision that the civil rights community ever made. To the opposite of segregation is desegregation. I argued this on Meet the Press with Johnny Cochran and Jesse Jackson. I said that the opposite of segregation is desegregation. The goal is pluralism. Integration is a personal matter. And I was debating this with head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Julius Chambers, a Black Harvard-trained lawyer. And we were debating this before the New York Bar Association. Probably about 88% through our debate, I said, Julius, we have two situations. Situation A, that's all Black, where there's the presence of educational excellence, and situation B, that's integrated, where there's diminished excellence. Where should we send our children? He said, to situation B. I said, well,
it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. Well, and then, but people said to me, at the other civil rights leaders when I left, they said, well, Bob, the Klan and the John Birch Society agrees with you. And I said, I don't care if I like classical music and Hitler does, I'm not going to stop liking classical music. If you stand for the truth, others may stand for that same truth for their own reasons. It doesn't persuade you from not standing for it. So what we did was we integrated ourselves out of our own businesses. And when we stepped into politics, a lot of Black politicians accepted urban renewal. Urban renewal was resisted by the Black business community. But they paid off a lot of Black politicians to support it. And highway systems were built right through most of the Black commercial districts in our urban centers. And we sat by and let this happen in the name of progress, in the name of integration.
Wow. So I'll soon hand over to Steve to ask you some questions. So I just have two more questions before I go. The first is comment on the Golden 13, and there's a follow-up question on that. The 16 black men who were, I think, who broke the record for the naval school. I remember I saw that in one of the interviews that you did. Just comment on that.
I'm sorry. Who were you? Was that to me?
Yes.
Would you repeat the question? You kind of broke up a little bit.
Okay, so there were 16 black men who were chosen to, or who were recruited to the Naval Academy, and they were given courses under
okay,
8 weeks. Yeah. So I
thank
wanted you to comment on that, and there is a follow-up question to that.
Okay, it's the difference between how oppression was handled then and how we handle it now. In 1943, there were no Black naval officers. They were prohibited from becoming officers. And so Eleanor Roosevelt persuaded her husband to require the Navy to train them. So the Navy recruited 16 college-educated Black men and took them to the training academy. But they were going to give these 16 Black men in 8 weeks what they gave white cadets 16 weeks in an attempt to wash them out. Well, when these men found out what the Navy had in mind, they didn't protest. They covered the windows in their barracks and stayed up all night and studied. And when they tested them at the end of the 8 weeks, they scored in the 90th percentile. So the Navy said, they cheated. So they took them in separate rooms and tested them. They scored in the 93rd percentile. Today, that record stands. No one has gotten a higher score at the Naval Academy, at Naval Training Center. The Navy commissioned 13 and rejected 3. And they became what we call the Golden 13. I met one of them in his 90s. He was a retired rear admiral. And there are other examples like that where blacks' pushback against oppression was performance. The best antidote to disrespect is to perform better. When Jackie Robinson came into the major leagues, he didn't just say, well, because blacks have been denied access, if blacks come up to bat, we have 4 strikes and you're out. No, we wanted the rules to remain the same. Hank Aaron, they didn't say, well, since you've been denied access to play, the home run record will have to be adjusted for blacks. But that's what's happening today. They're dumbing down the standards in the name of equity. It's so insulting to say that in order for blacks to achieve today, we must dumb down the standards. Nothing is more lethal than giving people a good excuse for failing or to explain their failure on external circumstances and exempt them from trying.
Okay, now my follow-up question would be, yes, this is an incredible story of success and triumph in the face of great odds, but isn't this a proof of white supremacy? Isn't this a proof of the oppression of the system? I mean, why should the black person have to do more to get the same results that the white person would have to get? And that kind of situation that these 16 African American men found themselves in years back, do we still have that kind of situation repeating itself currently?
But those conditions existed then. They don't exist now. You had 80 million white people vote for a black man for president twice. Name me one job in America that a black person cannot occupy. You can't name me one job that a black person can't get. Back in the 60s, you could name a whole lot of them. I wanted to be an architect. My mother said, blacks are not architects. There's nothing that a black child cannot achieve today. But someone said that if you condition people to enter the back door, even if there's no back door, they'll demand that you build one. That's what we're doing to our young people today. We're saying to them, whites are superior. I mean, how insulting to say that white supremacy, to say whites are superior and therefore blacks are inferior. I think it was Chuck Swindoll, Pastor Charles Swindoll, got it right when he said 10% of who we are is our external circumstance, how we were born, whatnot, where we were born. 90% of who we are is our attitude about the 10%. That you can take the most privileged white person in the world without an attitude of self-determination and resilience and perseverance. The best of circumstances will not make them successful. You can take a black child with determination, grit, and a strong work ethic, and nothing will keep that child from succeeding. It all has to do with your attitude. I've had the pleasure of working with people. I've had a young woman, Carolyn Brown, in New Jersey City. She watched her mother being murdered by her stepfather. And then her sister committed suicide, leaving her with her 2 children to raise. Carolyn, thinking herself having mental problems, took her then her husband divorced her. She gathered up those 4 children and went to Brown University and completed her undergraduate degree and went to law school. And 2 of those girls have PhDs today. There are many stories of people who have had the worst of circumstances, having nothing to do with their color, and yet they achieved against the odds. We're trying to establish a center for the study of resilience. We don't study the resilience of people enough. We're too preoccupied with why people failed and not enough focused on why people succeed under the worst of circumstances. You learn more by people who have achieved against the odds than you are studying failure. You can learn nothing from studying failure except how to fail. If you want to learn how to play the violin, would you go to 5 people who failed and say, let me learn from your mistakes? Or would you go to a person who has succeeded and say, teach me how you were successful? We should look at people who have overcome poverty and racism and achieved great things and ask them how they did it, rather than complaining about why 5 people didn't make it or studying failure.
So, Steve, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, well, now I get to follow that up. So, first of all, thank you, Mr. Woodson, for coming. I really appreciate having this opportunity to have a discussion with you. I really do appreciate it. So I'm kind of, just to give you kind of an explanation, I'm kind of the odd man out. I'm like the lefty libertarian who's kind of, I'm for LGBTQ plus rights. I'm for, a lot of things that my left associates are for. However, where I deviate is that I'm also for free and open discourse, free speech. I'm for having difficult conversations, not shying away from them. I'm also for not politicizing ideas. And so a lot of the conversations that I get kind of kicked out of from my own friends who are lefties is that I entertain ideas that are difficult to swallow. I read a lot of Thomas Sowell and W.E.B. Du Bois, which is kind of where I'm leading into my next question. Is there a reason why, from what I can tell, is you've left W.E.B. Du Bois out of your guys' curriculum in 1776 Unites? And I'm just kind of curious in what your criteria is for selecting those that are part of that, because I actually find W.E.B. Du Bois fascinating, but he's not the one that I would actually really mostly associate with. I prefer George Schuyler and Elaine Locke, but I do want to hear everything. I want to know everybody. I want to hear voices from every racialized Black experience. Is there a process in which you select those who can be in your curriculum, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, Du Bois was fascinating. It's very interesting that he really did not believe in Booker T. Washington and economic development base. He thinks we should do political and whatnot. And it was healthy during his period because we had, as you know, 3 strands of debate. You had the recolonizationists as through Marcus Garvey. You had those who should believe we should be pressing politics to Du Bois. And then you had Booker T. Washington, economic development. It's very interesting that later on in life, Du Bois had to come to Booker T. Washington for a job. And I visited Du Bois's grave in Ghana. And I look at what his legacy was, and then I look at a well-endowed institution that Booker T. Washington left, his legacy. And so that tells me a lot about. I'm more of an empiricist. I'm not a scholar. So I tend to cleave more to people who build things, who rescue things, who develop things, who have that ideas have the consequence of improving the human condition. And so what I try to do is recruit scholars who are studying success and resilience. I want scholars who are giving me information that I can apply and advise people how they can improve the quality of their life by what they have written. So that becomes the criteria. I'm not interested in having some debate club. I have been kicked out of more conservative forums than you kicked out of liberal forums.
I don't know about that.
Oh yeah. You know, because I believe, as one guy said, that when liberals look at poor people and black people, they see a sea of victims, and conservatives see aliens.
Yeah.
That I have been critical of Charles Murray and all those James Q. Wilson. I had my first debate with James Q. Wilson because these guys, you know, and because they don't offer solutions.
Right.
They just whine about how bad the left is without offering any alternative solutions themselves. So I have, in those forums, debated James Q. Wilson and all of them. So I'm kind of, you know, a radical centrist.
I think I get what you're saying. Yeah. And you know, one of the things that I really enjoyed about reading George Schuyler in particular is that he was kind of that no bullshit kind of guy. Excuse my language. He was like, "Now we're going to do this, and we're going to push forward." Same with Elaine Locke. Neither of them really kind of fell for that victimhood mentality. They were really going to soldier on and really kind of push through all of this stuff. And so I really enjoy reading them. I wish I could say that I'm an expert on it and I've read all of their work, but I just haven't had the time yet. But I find it interesting that, and if I can actually share a quote with you, I think you'll enjoy it. This is from Barbara J. Fields in Racecraft, and she said, "When virtually the whole of society, including supposedly thoughtful, educated, intelligent persons, commits itself to belief in propositions that collapse into absurdity upon the slightest examination, the reason is not hallucination or delusion, or even simple hypocrisy. Rather, it's ideology. And ideology is impossible for anyone to analyze rationally who remains trapped on its terrain." And it seems like that is a really good explanation of kind of the quagmire, to quote Dr. Sheena Mason, of race. That's the problem that we're running into, is that people are so obsessed with this race question that they spend more time on it than actually doing something else more valuable for their time. Is this something that you would agree with, or would you pick that apart?
I would pick it apart to this. The biggest challenge is not racism, it's elitism. The people who have time to sit around and debate whether or not microaggression is for real or whatnot, or come up with all of these terms, these aren't the people who are in these communities trying to survive every day. I spend 80% of my closest friends have letters in front of their names, not behind them. They're ex-something, ex-drug addict, ex-gangbanger, ex-predator. We have a group called Voices of Black Mothers United. These are thousands of women who lost their children to urban violence. They're against defunding the police. When you sit and talk to people in these communities who are suffering directly the consequences of these policies, they don't have time to talk about microaggression. This is for the elites, and the elites on both left and right are using low-income blacks as pawns to make their point. When those riots occurred beyond George Floyd, the first thing they did was migrate. First of all, they burned down black businesses. And the first thing they did was migrated from justice for blacks to denigration of the nuclear family, denigration of the Christian cross. And they quickly moved to their real agenda.
Right.
Burning the flag, denigrating the cross. But blacks are only, so race is being used.
I think I know where you're going with that, and I agree with it.
As a part of another agenda.
So I actually agree with everything that you just said there. And the reason why I wanted to bring up Barbara J. Fields and that particular quote was that it seems to me like there's an elitism that is literally in place to think up new ways of trying to control their constituency.
Exactly.
That constituency is who believes that race actually does matter, or that, God forbid, race is actually a biological problem, which it's not. We know for a fact that there is no biological difference between white folk and black folk. We know that. I mean, it's kind of like at this point, it's a moot point. But for some reason, these people in positions of power in these elitist leftist side groups like to propagate it like this is a problem. But the remainder, the rest of the 90% of the population doesn't care. We really don't care. What we care about is being able to have peace in our lifetime, to be able to come home and have peace, to be with our children. And I know that racialized black folk think the exact same way. I mean, George Schuyler wrote about that in the Negro Art Hokum. He said, most people, white and black, we behave exactly the same. We go home, we watch TV, we read the same newspapers, we watch the same TV programming. We love our children exactly the same. The only difference is when we come together in a social environment. So one has to beg the question, where's the difference? The difference isn't where, the difference is where this elitism comes into place, and it creates a divide where it shouldn't actually exist. And it bothers me that people on my side of the slash, the left side of the slash, can't see that very most obvious problem. And if you look at people like Peggy McIntosh and her idea of white privilege, like if you read that, if a racialized black person reads that and they're well off, they're going to exhibit white privilege. It's like, it's ridiculous the kind of crap and garbage these people come up with instead of sticking to the facts, which are people deserve to be human beings. They deserve to be treated like human beings. But something that I apologize for rambling on, but I'm enjoying having the opportunity to pick your brain because I'll probably never get it again. So,
well, Delano Spears, one of our scholars, I think summarized it. Who's driving this? He says, you have guilty whites who are seeking absolution from crimes they never committed.
Right.
And guilty and entitled blacks who are seeking absolution from injustice they never suffered.
Right. So I guess my last question would be, my last question for right now, because I think I'll probably have a few more for you, is actually, who is your favorite classical composer? Mine is two. It's Paganini and Vivaldi.
Ravel and Mozart.
Very nice.
Yeah. And also,
thank you.
I collect Welsh music.
Welsh.
What's an urban black guy doing collecting Welsh music? See, for years.
I don't know. Same reason why a mechanic loves Paganini and Dvorak and Vivaldi. I guess it doesn't matter. It sounds beautiful to our ears.
That's right. Welsh miners.
This is also kind of touched on, got a bit of my experience. So for me, I actually, I was born in Texas, but I grew up in Alaska. But what brought my family up there was the oil industry. My dad is an engineer works for the pipeline. And actually, it turns out most of my, that's the thing that my family does. Most of my people in my family are engineers, right? For my grandfather who went to World War II, the basis for that is he was in construction, right? And he worked his way up from construction. And, it does pain me at least to see, people from the left of the elitists to denigrate veterans, denigrate, the industrial, military industrial complex. It's a very evil thing, but it has brought so many people up in the world, has taught them discipline, once if you don't have a GED, or if you're not formally educated and you enter into the military, that sets you up with a basis of skills that once you get out, regardless of your skin tone, they know that you can do what you do, right? You've been have a stamp of approval by the US government. And I see that also in terms of politics, like to denigrate that and try to even defund the military. That's another avenue of progress and success that they're also kind of attacking. But that's my ramble. But so for me, I had a pretty middle class upbringing, right? And I was in a place where like less than 3% of them, like population in Alaska is African American, but I never really experienced anything negative. And when I moved down to the lower 48 and kind of made more friends, and obviously the left kind of opens itself up to you, that's when I kind of had like this weird experience of white guilt, and then this projection of oppression onto you. It feels like a weight that oh, you must feel awful, and it's almost like a psychological Jedi mind trick of like see that was racist, right? And see, and they're trying to teach you to see all these things, which kind of leads, I would think, Black elites or Black people who are not experiencing oppression to then to inherit that kind of guilt that they're not experiencing oppression, that they're not a true Black person if you're not living in an impoverished area, a neighborhood. And through that avenue, I see that's how they become mouthpieces for the left to advocate for this very negative view of the United States. And I think I was almost going down that track, but when I was actually reading the history, right? I read the history. I read about, sundown towns and the Great Migration and all these things. I only became more and more grateful that my life is pretty good. Things have improved so much. And even when they're talking about how all these negative things in the past, they never stop to think of they don't happen anymore. You have like it's like you realize these things, you're like, oh my God, all these things happen. You don't live through that. That's not your pain. That was that person's pain. And I think it devalues, the people who actually endure the suppression in the past to take that on as if you know what they're talking about, and to not honor it. But I think getting into, how the culture has changed, right? And how, especially for like something like the Great Migration, back then, and you mentioned in one of your talks that, more people, died in gang violence in like Detroit in a year than in 40 years of lynching in the South, right? And so if we, as Black people, like, in the South, had the Great Migration from, 1910 to 1940 under like conditions that weren't as nearly as severe as they are today, why isn't there another Great Migration out of these dangerous neighborhoods, out of these failing neighborhoods, out of these failing communities to more opportunity? Because I think that's where Americans thrive, is where they have the immigrant mindset to go forth and to seek new opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are great questions and challenges, but there are quite a few elite Blacks who do virtual signaling as an excuse for not doing anything. Mm-hmm. See, so as long as I can say, oh, I hate white people, or I'm down with this and I'm down with this, no one will ask them, what are you doing? And they're not doing anything.
I can't actually think of anything that Al Sharpton's done.
Except flying in a private jet to a protest.
Well, oddly enough, they say
Maxine Waters, who left a $3 million mansion.
Yeah,
out
they
of
say
her district.
They're doing the work. What they never explain what the work is.
Right. But they're also leaving safe communities where they are personally guarded, and telling you we don't need the police. So
Right.
But 80% of my time I spend with people in those neighborhoods. That's who I serve. That's who I am.
Right, because you actually said that you left the civil rights activist sphere to go into these neighborhoods and help people in those neighborhoods.
Right.
I think you said something like, and this was regarding your $22 trillion statement, was the poverty programs came along where they spent $22 trillion with 70 cents going not to the poor but to those who serve the poor. They asked which problems are fundable, not which ones are solvable. And so I realized that I'm in the wrong struggle. I need to be out reaching out and helping poor people of all races who are locked out. And so that, I think that kind of explains, like, really succinctly the work that you're doing. You're actually on the ground helping people where it actually freaking matters.
Right.
Like
Dr.
where
King
it's influenced people.
Yeah. Dr. King said, what good does it do to have the right to live in a neighborhood of your choosing or the restaurant if you don't have the means to exercise that right? So freedom doesn't begin with, it begins with opening the door, but it succeeds when you're able to walk through that door. But the civil rights movement was not interested in it, in helping people. I'll give you one example that really finished it for me. We picketed outside for 2 months the Wyeth Laboratory in Westchester, Pennsylvania, where I did the civil rights leadership. That's Barrett Rustin's hometown. We picketed for 2 months outside, and when they desegregated, they hired 9 Black PhD chemists. When we approached them to join our movement, they said they got these jobs because they were qualified, not because of the sacrifices of people who were factory workers, barbers, janitors. And when that happened twice, I said, I am in the wrong struggle, that this is a bait and switch game. The civil rights leaders, remember, became political office holders in those, and they were the ones spending the 22 trillion.
Yeah.
And this is one other statistic. Only 2 out of 10 whites with college education works for government. 6 out of 10 blacks with college education works for government. So our middle class is anchored in the sector of society that needs poor people to serve. That's why you have that, like Washington, D.C., you're talking about in the last 20 years, almost 19,000 low-income blacks have been gentrified out of Washington, D.C. But no one discusses that.
Okay.
No, they don't discuss that.
Yeah, it seems like
sorry,
you're. Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah, let me just get this question in since we're talking about. I wanted to ask. The oppression of the past, even though it has ended, doesn't it have some lingering effects, especially psychologically, that can account for the way the African American community is currently? Can we solely put the blame on the left trying to push a certain narrative? Isn't there an objective effect, a carryover effect from the legacy of slavery, of Jim Crow, of redlining, and all that
that
terrible
happened.
stuff that
No,
Black people had to go through?
no,
Because
man,
that is their history.
that's just BS. Excuse me. I don't buy I really don't buy the legacy of slavery stuff. You know what I mean? Maybe this is beyond my pay grade to understand. But when I see people who were, again, we count at least 20 people who were born slaves who died millionaires. Some of them actually went back and purchased a plantation on which they were slaves.
But those may just be the exceptions. Those may just be exceptions.
But then
we define a
you
community
learn
by the exceptions.
you learn innovation. Only 3% of Americans are entrepreneurs, but they generate 70% of the jobs. So you can't discount something because it's a small amount. It can have a tremendous impact. Again, 3% of the entrepreneurs generate 70% of the jobs. Okay? And so it's the same in communities that you have social entrepreneurs, culture. Like 80% of 60% of Apple's income came from an invention that didn't exist 7 or 8 years ago. So it's the same in our culture. We had an explosion of we had movie theaters, we had all kinds of Black Wall Streets, and so the question, so it's not just a few. The majority, I mean, a large numbers of people have achieved against the odds, and so it's very difficult to then identify and say, well, you know, tell me what. Well, maybe let me ask the question back to you. Explain to me what are residual legacy of slavery and discrimination. Tell me today. Trace it right back to slavery and discrimination. Tell me give me like 4 things that you can point to today that can be traced to slavery and Jim Crow. If you can't answer it, it's a question you need to ask somebody else.
I have no idea. I mean, Nigeria.
Well, then you need to. But I'm just saying, anybody that brings that crap to you, you need to challenge them to tell you then, give you some examples of the legacy issue. Let them give you examples.
I think I can ask one is black ghettos. Like that would be the answer that my friends would probably put in my ear would be, what about black ghettos?
Ghettos, you had Jewish ghettos, you had all kinds of, even in ghetto life. I lived in a ghetto, if you want to call it. But we had our own businesses in there. Ghettos are there's a congregation of people who are compelled to live together. It doesn't mean that it has a negative connotation. In our ghetto, we had a Black school, public school. All 3rd grade plays were held at night because parents could attend. And on the back table, there were lunch pails piled up. That's the number of parents who came. So because we were grouped together, we didn't mug and kill each other. We had our own businesses. We were thriving.
Why do you think that the left claims that Black entrepreneurship has dropped so drastically in the last 20 years?
It has not dropped. I mean, they're talking about it. For one thing, affirmative action is one of the reasons why I think it's hostile to Black economic advancement. When you and I'm about to write about this because I'm going to trace over the last 20 to 30 years 4 major programs that were supposed to be put in place to promote entrepreneurship and affirmative action, and they were the worst things that ever happened. For instance, I'll just give you a quick example. I'm not going to take a lot of time. 8A set-aside programs that you have to be, companies have to, they expanded it to include white women as well. But typically a friend of mine who was a contractor on the Alaska pipeline, he successfully got a $3 million bid to build a certain part of the pipeline. He takes 10% off the top and then subcontracts it back to a white firm. He walks away with a $300,000 windfall. Meantime, all whites show up and build the pipeline. That's typical. So you have a few people, rather than using it as an opportunity to get into business, they use it as a ripoff. And
a cash out.
A cash out. It happened, and I can take you industry by industry where this has happened.
So this kind of goes to this is what I've been thinking is, especially things like affirmative action, but when you're talking about all of the adversity, right? But how innovation is created is you have a problem and you're going to solve it, right? Like you said before, Blacks couldn't find a hotel in certain cities, so an enterprising person or people solve that problem. And that you in taking on that risk and serving a need, you gain benefits, right? And so in the process of government intervention to basically have an easy out for a problem, right? In terms of affirmative action, instead of creating your own company, we'll just give you slots to go into another company, right? And then therefore it reduces the incentive to actually create your own company by kind of seemingly removing a really, really low barrier. So, path of least resistance, it prevents more people from going down maybe the harder path, but the path that has longevity, really. And so is that kind of, does that also kind of feed into how essentially government intervention, whether it's welfare, whether it's affirmative action, all these things, is stifling African Americans?
Absolutely. You mentioned hotels. In our essays, almost every major city, because when we were denied access, we built our own. The Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carbon and Calvert Hotel in Overtown, Miami, the St. Teresa in New York, the St. Charles in Chicago, and on and on and on and on. We built our own hotels. There were 5 men in Greenwood, in the Greenwood section of Tulsa, that owned their own private planes in 1920. I mean, so we had great wealth, and we created it ourselves. But our young people don't know that.
Yeah, and when I was a kid, when they had doing a wax museum thing and name a hero, I always did Madam C.J. Walker, right? And that was a problem right there. There were no hair products for Black women, and back then she filled that void and she became a millionaire. She became incredibly wealthier than white women. White women didn't think of a business idea and created, I think she was the first female millionaire in the United States, right? But today they're petitioning, like an established company, give us products. Why would they? Make your own products, right? But that's the real frustration of, they're asking for someone to make space for them at a table when they could just make their own table. And then, they're complaining about, all these people control these things. You can set up the conditions in which you can control everything from the jump, but they don't really believe in the investment of an effort. They want to have a guarantee. And that's not what life is about.
It's kind of like they want white people's acknowledgement, but yet don't do, like, they sit there and they complain about white acknowledgement, but then they pander into it instead of just being like, we don't need your acknowledgement, we're just going to do it.
Well, I have two solutions. I say to Black folks, you need to go through 1 year without talking about white people at all. And what I say to white audiences that I am a self-certified racial exorcist. So I wave my hand twice, and you're free of guilt for slavery and discrimination for 1 year. We should laugh at some of this crap that's coming down and go about the area working. No one should do more for you than you're willing to do for yourself. That has, if all white people went to Europe and Canada tomorrow, tell me one problem it will solve that's facing large numbers of Black community. How would it affect the Black on Black violence? How would it affect unemployment? So these are the kind of realities we must confront. I don't want to be compared with white people anymore. I want to be compared to Nigerians. That's my standard. They're better educated, they're richer, they got stronger families. Yeah, so that would be my plea.
Nigerians are living the American dream.
They're leading it, man, I'm telling you. I don't have a poor Nigerian friend.
Yeah.
I never heard of a Nigerian on welfare.
Well, Charles is an author, man. He's written a book.
I know. That's what I say,
He,
man.
he does not lack the drive, man. He does not lack the drive.
Right. But I'm serious. They really should study what are that they're doing. That's different. They're just working hard. That's all, and studying. They get strong families. That's all. There's nothing magical about it. It's applying old values to new reality. That's what we've got to do. The main thing is just stop bitching about life and get up and start to go to work. That's it.
So, Steve, do you have any more questions?
So yeah, I've got two. Something that comes up frequently that personally that I would like to hear your opinion on is we do have this problem of a serious incarceration problem that of racialized Black folk, especially racialized Black men. And we also have the problem of what happens when men are not in the house anymore and they don't have influence with their children anymore. These are two very serious problems, but I also don't want to discount the importance of just a two-parent household, because I am for LGBTQ rights, and I do believe that lesbian and gay households can provide a very similar environment, because generally what happens is in those environments, especially in lesbian couples or gay male couples, is one will take on a more feminine role and the other one will take on a more masculine role. And we do see I'm trying to who was it? It was oh crap, his name is going to escape me right now. But Thomas Sowell spoke on this again too. I hate to bring up Thomas Sowell again because he's not the only author out there, but I'm also a men's rights activist, so let me put it that way. So I do believe in the role that men have to play in our children's lives. I think it's incredibly important. But there's some places where that's just not possible, such as lesbian marriages. But what you do find is you find that one of them takes generally a more masculine role, and the children do better. So it doesn't seem like it needs to be necessarily a heteronormative kind of an environment where it has to be a male and a female. But it's important that children have two parents, though. That seems to be the most important factor in most of these situations, is that children are raised in environments where they have two parents, two loving, available parents to help support them. And I'm almost curious if this isn't part of the problem that happens when we incarcerate specifically Black men, racialized Black men, at the rates that we are. We're losing that in racialized Black communities and the influence that those men have in their families and with their children. Do you have a solution for that, or do you have a different perspective?
Yeah. Let me ask you, when you say we are incarcerating, tell me what you mean by that.
It's just a generality. That's going to be the left.
No, I mean, tell me, but that's very important, because
yes,
the assumption seems to be that they are being unjustly or imprisoned.
Right. Well, it's the left's classic problem of only seeing the result instead of actually understanding why it's happening. So this is something that I disagree with my fellow lefties on, is that we look at results and we assume correlation, or we assume causation. We just kind of look at something and we assume that it must be because of racism. I don't actually agree with that, but we have to at least address the fact that they are being incarcerated at ridiculous numbers.
All right, they're being incarcerated, as David Chappelle said, because they're committing more crimes.
Well, I mean, they wouldn't be in there if they weren't committing a crime. I completely agree with you.
Okay. But let me just say that let's look at some data. That first of all, incarceration has never been correlated with poverty. That's well, people are stealing because they're hungry. No, they ain't stealing baloney. And so if you look at the trend lines from the turn of the century, Blacks were 13% of the population, but it's flattened out from the turn of the century all the way up until 1960. incarceration rates were low as compared under racial conditions that are far worse. If whites were, the question is why weren't we, these high incarceration rates when there was virulent racism, when there were no blacks as lawyers or judges, or even
when you could have had the power to put
officers.
anybody away.
When you got the power any way, it did not happen. But it is happening precisely in circumstances like I was living in New York at the time of the Rockefeller thing, when Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas and all these drug kingpins were dropping people like flies. The demands for locking up drug dealers and giving them life came from the black community. Rockefeller responded to a black demand of households to do that. So those incarceration rates were reflecting the will of Black America at the time. No racial conspiracy to it. Okay? So, but it was really the separation, as I said, of those families, two-parent families. So you have the combination of welfare policies, you have the combination of all those things, and that's when the incarceration rates, I think it went up from in 1960, there were 90,000 blacks in prison, and by the time 2020, it went up to 900,000.
Right.
That's the steep. Okay, so but that isn't caused by racial discrimination and whatnot. It is because by cultural shift, the decimation of the family, all these breakdowns. Okay, what is the solution? I don't think you're going to go into many low-income black communities and tell them that a nuclear family of a man and a woman raising children somehow can be substituted the way you said. I just don't believe that they buy that. Mm-hmm. But what we have found to work is that these young men need surrogate fathers. I'll give you one quick example. In Washington, D.C. in 1992, in an area called Benning Terrace, there were 53 murders in the 5 square block area because of warring factions of the Avenue and Circle. I trained 5 men who were ex-offenders, the Alliance of Concerned Men. They went into that community because a 12-year-old boy was killed and was national news. And I knew something about gang intervention. So I said, go in there, bring them to my office. They brought 16 of them to my office. Long story short, we negotiated a truce. The same young men who were terrorizing the community became ambassadors of peace. They formed one, and they went in there and they became coaches to the younger kids. So you had 140 boys responding to 8 young adults who stayed in their lives for 10 years. We went down from 53 murders down to 0 for 12 years.
Wow.
The coaches said, and when we formed 4 football teams, the coaches said the kids behaved themselves when they were with us, but not when they were with their parents or the teachers. So they required the kids to get a behavioral card signed every Friday by their teachers and their moms. And the mom said, the only control I have over my sons are these behavioral cards. What we did was there were surrogate dads through these coaches. And we've taken that model, and these kids stayed on for 12 years. We didn't have a single gang murder in there. And we learned from that, and we exported that to other cities. So it's a long-winded way of telling you that we must look at surrogate ways of providing fathering to those boys, and it can be through coaches.
I'm perfectly okay with that answer. I didn't want the answer that lesbian couples just shit out of luck, because I have deep connections with lesbian couples. I love them. They're my friends. They're my family. I love them and I want them to be successful. And I don't speak against that. All I'm telling you, I'm speaking for what the people I represent want. Absolutely. Totally understand.
What they desire is to have these young men act as strong fathers to these boys, because
And you
I
need
can
strong
tell
men to
you-
do that.
And they need strong men to do that. When in fact, the coaches, if the boys fight on the field, they make them hold hands and walk around the field. They will only accept that discipline from somebody. If they say, I'm not going to do that, go home. You're not on the team anymore. They don't want that.
Right.
In other words, these coaches become moral mentors and character coaches. We can put 8 of them in a school of 1,000 kids, and they can bring peace in that school.
Yeah.
So so the approach to me is to get strong peer mentors from the community suffering the problem. Let them and I raise money so they can stop driving a FedEx truck or stop doing, so they can work full time in the schools and in the homes or in the community. That's what I would saturate these communities with, young men whose lives have been transformed and redeemed, and they are witnesses to kids that transformation is available to them. So that's what the Woodson Center specializes in doing.
So this kind of partly answers one question I was having of, how you kind of, it seems like this is a great solution within, kind of, a few decades, but a more, obviously, I think you would agree, a more sustainable option is actually have intact families. And it seems like it's a vicious cycle. It's a vicious cycle of you need, if these kids just like, yes, a coach is great, but it'll be even better if you always had a dad when you came home.
Totally agree with you.
And so it seems like, culturally, in these communities, because obviously, my dad came in and he embarrassed me like all parents do. But yeah, that was my dad. But so it seems like the norm of, a lot of these people go into relationships not even really expecting to marry a person. And I've kind of gone down a weird YouTube hole in which, there are women who, when they want a baby, they have a baby, and then they think that they're going to go out and find someone to get married to. The person that they're choosing to have a child with, to create a life with, isn't the guy that she wants to be with. And how do we get even on that level to get that culture to change, where there are people who are not thinking, who are thinking that, this is not normal and this shouldn't be normalized?
Let me tell you, it's 100%. We've had one of our ladies in public housing, for instance, told couples who were cohabitating, if you get married, we will pay for the wedding and the reception. And about 12 couples showed up. And everyone thought that was ridiculous for her to make that offer. But I think you've got to encourage 2-parent households and take steps to stand up for it. You need options. That's what we're talking about. If you can just get some of these kids from 8 to 18, if we can just get them to their majority, alive and intact, armed with the proper values. Most of those ex-gang members that I told you about are married and are now coaching, but they're married couples, whatnot. So we need to support efforts, have a variety of options from within. My dad died when I was 9, even my mother, 5th grade education with 5 kids. The military saved me. I dropped out of high school and went into the Air Force, and the Air Force found qualities in me, and then I got educated and then came out and went to college. And so we just need to do everything we can to try to get our young people as many options as we can. Mm-hmm. From within, okay. but the answers come from within the community suffering the problem. That's what I'm saying.
Like stronger churches, right? I mm-hmm. think
right. Institutions.
It's like institutions that can speak to morality, because I think it's a large error to think that the government can speak to morality. It's not the place of the government.
Yeah, it's a horrible idea.
Yeah,
but they're trying, and that's the part that I can't get on board with. You cannot legislate morality either way. I'm against it either way, but I think that, they think that if they can compel speech of, you have to say this to this person because of this person's personal belief about themselves or their belief about other people, you kind of erode away rights as an American. You erode away what makes America, dynamic and flexible. Like, you should be able to speak your mind. You should be able to, act as an individual, not compelled as the government deems you to act and behave.
Well, the Democrats have been trying to be the teat that marginalized communities have wanted to, they've wanted to replace the government with a teat to suck on, and that's kind of how they've been operating for a very long time, and we know that is not beneficial. Like, the more power you give to individuals and to command their own lives, they do better almost every single metric. But unfortunately, you've got a Democratic Party that wants to basically place itself as the teat in which poor people can suck on, so that they can keep their constituency, because the best way to do that is to keep them poor.
You're right. I'm going to have to jump off, but I just want to enjoy this conversation. But I really believe that everybody should be agents of their own uplift. And so any policy, any government, any program to promote that. But I also think our challenge is more moral and spiritual than it is economic and political. And it's the cultural for a fight that we're in now. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking
I'd like
with us.
to be in touch with all of you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodson. But before you go,
have your contact information.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. All right. Okay. So we're going to reach you by mail. Thank you very much for coming. We would like to have you some other time, because there's still a few questions that would have loved to run by you, but you have to go now. So no problem.
All right.
When next we'll have a chat to ask you those questions. Thank you very much for coming.
If you still believe in it, right? You all believe in Thanksgiving? Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, sir.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Even though I don't know what Thanksgiving
is.
Happy Thanksgiving. No, we don't.
All right, man.
All right, bye.
Let me hear from you.
All right.
Bye.
All right.
All right, bye. Wow, that was good.
What a gift. Really good. What a gift.
Yeah. There was one question I really wanted to get in, which was, whites, in absolute numbers, whites are the biggest beneficiaries of welfare. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right.
So why has it impacted the Black community more? Why has the negative effect impacted the Black communities more than it has the white community?
I don't know, man. That's a good question. I was hoping to plug Dr. Sheena Mason and her theory of racelessness, because I think that would be very valuable to their efforts there. But I think one of the great things about having him on there is he's able to really kind of put a stopper in some bullshit, especially the bullshit that some individuals on the far left want to consistently kind of try and cram down our throats. And some of that bull crap I still believe in. And then other stuff that he spoke to, I've known for years, and I'm glad to see him being, well, quite frankly, he's very kind and he's very respectful. And I really enjoyed having that conversation with him. That's not something that I find very frequently with people on the left, though. And I'm kind of curious why that is.
Why are you still on the left?
Why is the left so shitty?
Still on the left?
Because I believe in things that the right still won't accept.
No, see the thing is, I think Americans they're so tribal that even when they know that their tribe is wrong, they'd rather stick with the tribe and be criticizing it.
Well, that's the funny thing, though, Charles, is the reason why I'm left is not because of ideas, it's because of beliefs. So my belief in the rights of LGBTQ plus people to live their lives as they see fit, to marry as they see fit, Those, yeah, let's get
don't encourage them.
for Chloe's dad. But no, I'm very firmly planted on the left on this, where I do believe in the rights of LGBTQ folks plus folks to exist as human beings and have all the legal rights that everybody else does without the discrimination that comes along with it a lot of the times. I also believe in the right to a smaller government, which is actually a far right or right side. I'm in a weird political kind of place where I kind of don't exist in either, but I exist in both.
You're in limbo.
So, yeah, I'm in a limbo. I'm in some weird kind of place where I can't exist anywhere else because those are the morals that I live by. But it's I don't know. It's weird. It's just really weird what I think and what I believe because I don't fit in anywhere.
Well, the thing is, I think even when I was, I believe I was on the left, but I had to examine my own personal values and how I live my life because it's really weird where, I was like, oh yeah, I totally believe people should be able to do this, but when given the opportunity, I don't do that because I know that's not a good idea, right? So I actually have to be consistent with my values instead of, oh yeah, you should totally, do ecstasy. Right. I mean, yeah, I believe people should be able to, should be free to do that, but I shouldn't encourage people to do it because I know it's not a good idea. It's definitely not a good idea. But kind of looking at the right used to, I think the right actually has an opportunity. Not necessarily that I'm firmly on the right, but I'm willing to listen to ideas, and I've listened to left ideas for a long time.
Well, you're on the right.
But by default I'm right, yeah. By any metric of if they're going to define it. But I remember seeing old about right-leaning ideas of where someone was saying about queer people, right? Or oh, how we support that, and the Republican was like, I have no business in someone else's bedroom, why are you asking me that type of question? So those the right has a legacy of having those different ideas being all contained within that tent. And so I think that also, that aspect of that history is being ignored, that a bunch of different ideas, you don't have to hunt, there's no right-leaning person that agrees with all of the ideas that have been underneath the right umbrella. They have their own disagreements within themselves. So there is always, it seems like there's space. And I think that's originally what, alt-right kind of started out as LGBTQIA people, who had conservative values, who wanted to make a space for themselves on the right because they didn't agree with the left. And then it got co-opted by, oh, that means neo-Nazis. Okay. So now
Right.
the term alt-right has kind of, I think that's kind of a thing that the left does is that they try to compress everything into such a simplistic idea that it means only that.
Well, it'd be amazing if they actually asked the question, how many people are on the right but yet still believe in LGBTQ plus rights? You'd actually find a lot of people on the right actually believe in LGBTQ rights.
Yeah. And I think now that there are more LGBTQ people coming away from the left saying those guys are crazy, they're just happy to have people that agree with them, or that there are ideas that supersede the idea of one man, one woman in a relationship. They're like, oh, that's your personal business. But hey, if you also agree in small government, we can talk.
Right.
And I think that they value.
So I can overlook that little thing as long as we agree on this thing over here.
The thing is, as regards this LGBTQ, in my country, it's actually, being gay is illegal. I mean, it's a crime. It's
right.
Laws were passed some few years ago. I think 21 years. And when the conversation came up, it struck me as odd. I was like, this doesn't make sense. Of course, obviously, I don't support gay marriage, but criminalizing it didn't make sense to me, because how are you going to prove that this person is gay? Are you going to go into their bedrooms, and that's evasion of their privacy? You understand? How are you going to prove that they are gay? How are you going to, whatever people are doing in their bedrooms is not your business. It's not government has no business being in people's bedrooms. So
but
how are you going to prove that?
it's interesting in the United States. So, in terms of civil rights, maybe we should have asked this when Bob was here, but how they got a lot of these legal cases of like racial discrimination in terms of law is that they kind of some of these laws weren't actually being enforced. So yeah, there can be a law against a Black person sitting in a white car, but if there's no one who's ever arrested for that, you can't actually challenge the law. So they hired a cop and they had a Black person sitting there, and they instigated the arrest, and so that they would have a case to bring it to court to bring down the law. The same thing happened, is the same thing essentially. They found out that the civil rights people were doing this. So like, hey, you can't like kind of create the situation in order to, you basically create, to challenge it. So you actually have to organically find people in the wild who have been arrested or have suffered damages from this law that you have no relation to. And so that's what was happening, I think, in Texas for, the anti-sodomy type of thing. And so what happened was, they can't enforce it. They can't break into someone's home to see if they're, having sex with their gay partner, right? And so what happened was there was a gay couple that was having a messy argument or something like that. It was like a domestic abuse or something like that, right? And when the cop got there, okay, no one really talked. And I guess he was like, I can't really arrest them on anything. You know what? We do have this law against, sodomy. Okay, then he charged them for that just because he had to figure out how to separate those two, right? And that was the case where like finally we actually found somebody who was charged under this law, and that's how they kind of took it up to the
anti-sodomy laws were used for a long time to prejudice against people of color as well.
Yeah. So, but like the enforcement, like you said, Charles, it's very, very difficult. There are probably plenty of people that were, in violation of that law. But like,
no, I don't know anybody in my country who's been prosecuted for being gay. I don't know anybody who.
That's because they're too afraid to, Charles.
Well, I mean, like,
see, the thing is, there are people that have actually come out and say that they are gay. You understand? But well, how can you prove it? He might just be you can't prove it. He just said it. He might say he was joking or something. But since the law has been passed, I don't think there's anybody that's been arrested and charged to court for this and all that. No. I think there was a cross-dresser one time that they had some issues and all that. But he's out there, he's free, he's doing his stuff. He's still on the internet in Nigeria, he's still dressing like a woman, painting and doing all the things that you get. So he's still out there. So it's a nonsense law. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, here in the US, that's why we had the Stonewall riots, really, was that you had a group of men. So the Stonewall was a bar, and it was actually owned by the mob. But the mob doesn't like gay folk, but they don't care because the bar brought in money, and that's what matters, right? So since the mob had, cops on their payroll, the cops would call the mob and say, "Hey, look, you guys are going to get checked out tonight. You're going to get raided, so just be aware."
And Dr. Mason coming for a few minutes.
But yeah, as soon as she gets in here. But anyway, so what happened was the system fell apart and they got raided, and there was a bunch of men in drag, and it was already a known gay bar. And so what you have is, if there was no law against it, then there would have been no crime. That's the problem, is when we start making laws to criminalize a certain behavior that really shouldn't be within the purview of the federal government, then you've got a problem. And that's what we're talking about, is that like in countries like Nigeria, is that when you make a law, you're actually criminalizing, specifically attempting to criminalize a certain type of behavior that otherwise wouldn't be a crime without it. Does that make sense?
And one of the reasons why that law even came up in my country, because nobody even cared about all such things before, it was because the Western world was sort of trying to impose it on the continent. They were trying to impose it on African countries. They were actively imposing it. So it was sort of a pushback on Western influence. Like, no, we don't want this.
Gotcha.
Because prior to then, those things in schools, you hear cases of people being homosexuals and all that. Nobody makes
Right.
the government has the government didn't make any comment on all that. But when it became a matter of policy, tying aids and grants to those types of things that do not really agree with the sentiments of the larger population of the country, then the lawmakers thought they had to step in and do something.
Yeah, it seems like it's better for a country to organically figure out like how they're going to deal with it culturally instead of having a completely different culture's values just like supplanted in there. You're going to have it's like a body, like that detects a foreign substance, right? And you're just going to make antibodies to it, in order to push back this foreign influence. And that's what it seems like to me. And I don't think that the left, I don't think the rest of the left in the United States realize how many people they're just turning off to their cause just by butting their head into someone else's business that they kind of shouldn't, right? Same thing. Like I think I saw it was like a 38-second YouTube thing, right? Where it was just like a comment. It was just a picture of a comment that said, "What is wrong with the term Latinx?" And then it just showed how many comments it had underneath it and like how many downvotes, right? And it's just like that's like the idea of people trying to impose their will on a completely separate language.
It's like 90% of Latin people don't want Latinx as a descriptor. They don't want it.
And also it's probably I've heard it's just bad grammar too.
It is bad grammar. It's really bad grammar.
So it's like, why are you imposing just like it's why are you imposing this on the culture? And I think the same they're trying to do the same thing with Filipino. They're Filipinx or something like that. And it's just like, why?
Chloe, even outside of the feminine and masculine endings quagmire that we find ourselves in, I'm sure you saw the whole Negro controversy, if we can even call it a controversy, with Crayola.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, what a joke.
So for anyone who doesn't know or isn't aware, so the Spanish word for black is negro, and it's pronounced like negro. And an African American started a petition trying to get Crayola to remove the word, and she told this heartfelt story on Twitter about how she had to quote unquote explain to her, I don't know, like 8 or 9-year-old son about the word Negro. And even when Crayola responded and said, this is a Spanish word for black, having nothing to do with the American context for it, it still wasn't sufficient. And like, people are actually signing the petition. It's so
Yeah, I mean, well,
tell us how you really feel, Dr. Mason.
It's just I mean, I think it's absolutely ironic that people say like, oh, we're too US centric, we're too Eurocentric. And then in order, like, you buy into that ideology, and then you live out the thing that you hate by saying like, oh, you're using the term Negro in this American context. Like, no, do you realize it exists in a separate language as a color, right? Or like,
but the term Negro, actually, etymologically speaking, I think it was derived from either Latin or something close to the Spanish language now. So it still has the same roots. It's like,
yes, but it means the word
for
black.
It literally
the color black.
But I will tell you a more ridiculous
one. It was
one.
used to describe Africans because obviously we're black. So,
but I'll tell you something more ridiculous. So, like when you had that conversation with Tade, I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name because I forgot how you pronounce it. And you're talking about Ollie London. It's like, oh, can he speak Korean? And I've heard him, and I'm like, oh no, he cannot. Like, but like, so I remember seeing a video because the word for I in a sentence is niga, right? You know, like, so they would say, niga, you know, Irumi, you know, Chloe, right? Or something like that. Like, you know, like that's how they identify themselves in a sentence, right? And so like there was a black guy, like I think there's a video of a black guy in South Korea on a bus and just absolutely freaking out that people are saying the name, and people are just like, what the hell, why is this person freaking out? Because he thought that the whole bus was calling him the N-word. And it's like, do you realize they're literally talking about themselves? He had no clue about the basic grammar of Korean. Like that's the basic grammar of, like, you go anywhere, it's like watashi wa, like, American, right? Like you have to know that, like, what I
Talk
means.
about American entitlement.
And so this guy was just freaking out, and they're like, "Oh, this is offensive," and it's like, no, this is, they're literally not talking about you, like the opposite. But it's just this very, you know, myopic view of, like, you know, it's like that, like, Carly Simon song, where, like, you know, you're so vain, you probably think the song is about you.
Yeah.
That's Americans all day, every day.
Yep. You know, I just want you to know that, Dr. Mason, that my last and final question I was going to be spending on trying to get him to know you. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to get that last question in there, but I was going to promote you pretty heavily there, the last question.
No, I was saying in the chat box, I'm glad that didn't happen because, you know, let's face it, nobody can express my ideas as well as I can.
Yeah.
And the plan is for me to interview him separately, so I'll have that opportunity.
That's good.
Yeah, I saw that.
I hope to bring him back again, because there are a ton of questions that I need him to answer.
Yeah, he was such a great guest. Like, I was just listening and learning. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I think we should do this more with our faces. This is a lot better than Chloe. See how Chloe is doing.
But then you see my dad in the background. I definitely have a black father.
Your dad's a riot.
Yeah.
And you should always feature
all in
your
the
dad
background.
I know, this is weird. I'm usually the one on camera. But I was, like, you know, not prepared to be on camera, so.
Nah, it's all good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's mostly my reality, is like, I don't know.
I've been sick for 2 weeks. I haven't had a chance to get a haircut. I mean, my hair, look at this. I mean, it's just everywhere. That's a mess.
I'm glad you're feeling better though, Steve.
I am. I'm feeling a little bit better. It's getting better little by little. I still got a little bit of a cough, but I'm doing better. I walked around the mall for about an hour and a half with my wife yesterday, and I was spent, and I came home and slept for 4 hours. But aside from that, like, if I'm just sitting here, I'm doing okay. I'm all right.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
Charles, did you have something you wanted to chat up with me about? I'm sure it wasn't about Crayola.
Not
or
specifically.
you just wanted
I just wanted you to. Yeah. I do miss your voice, miss your thoughts. So
man, we got to do another chat soon, just the two of us again, because that was fun. Oh, we can give a little bit of a teaser. I'm doing a giveaway on my channel, and we're gonna have winners. There's gonna be an official announcement. This is just a shameless plug. And the winners are gonna receive Charles's book. Charles loves his book, and Adam Coleman's book. So it's gonna be a book giveaway. So I'm sure there'll be more conversations to be had on this channel about the giveaway, and it'll be easy to win. All of you have a head start because you're already subscribed to all the things. So
I already own like 2/3 of those books, so I'm not even gonna try.
Well, you missed the opportunity. Just find another Charles to interview, and it's just like you get the whole Charles collection.
Yeah, that would be
Oh,
Smart.
funny.
man.
Next time. We'll do that with Charles's second book. I'll find 2 other Charles.
Yeah.
So I
That'll be
read
good.
Charles Love's book. That was a really interesting book.
Yeah, man, he definitely doesn't hold any punches.
No, he was. I don't know how better to say it than he was not. He was much kinder than I would expect him to be, considering the points that he took to task. Where
Yeah.
he was not gentle, but he was kind.
Yeah.
So it was
Yeah.
ouch.
Yeah. Except the title. I mean, race crazy. It's already telling you,
Right.
it's already
Yeah.
telling you something. That's not a compliment.
Yeah, it's definitely not. Well, he tears everything apart, but he does it in a very intelligent way, and he does it in a very honest way, I would say. It was a good book. It was a good read. I actually, I bought it and then I listened to it on Audible, and I'm gonna read it again. And there's a few other books that I got to read still, but yeah, it was a
Have
good
you
book.
guys finished my book? Because Stanley suggested that we do a stream where we talk. You guys would basically ask me questions about the book. So, and we said 3 weeks, 3 weeks in 3 weeks time, which has passed anyway. But we're going to fix another time. So,
Yeah.
guys, please read up, so we can have that
Yes, it's
conversation.
such a quick read too. Like,
Yeah,
just
I'll finish it this week.
Yeah, I brought it with me. Here.
Oh, good.
Are you in Alaska, Chloe? Where are you?
No, I'm in Texas.
Oh, you're in Texas.
My parents are in Texas. They moved out of Alaska a few years ago. They built a place here, and I'm probably supposed to help my dad put up a mirror.
Oh, nice. What part of Texas?
North of San Antonio.
Okay, cool.
That is such a
I
bloody
spent
big
some years
state.
in Houston, so.
Yeah.
But-
Well, go on, Shia.
Oh no, I didn't have anything important to add.
Yeah. Well, I mean, coming from
Oh, you're in
Alaska.
the deep red state.
Well, I mean, being in Alaska, that's also a red state too. But there's a joke in Alaska, like if Texas keeps talking crap about being the biggest state, Alaska will cut itself in half, and then Texas could be the 3rd largest state.
Oh, man.
That's right, because topographically, Alaska's the bigger one, isn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like in terms of like being kind of like being in Alaska. It's almost like the opportunity of being outside of race issues, because in Alaska the race issues are between whites and natives, not like it's not black and white like at all. It's it's Black people are economically doing pretty well. They're Nigerians who work on the pipeline, professors, engineers, military. They're associated with the military. So I've never met a poor Black person in Alaska ever.
It's almost like race doesn't exist.
Well, except if you're native,
crazy.
because for natives, so it's like the most.
Is it possible, Chloe? Is it possible that skews your perception of race because you've always been around successful Black people? So you think that that's what applies to all Black people in America?
It probably does. I mean, I know that it's possible, right? It's possible. And the thing is, but even when I come back to Texas, where Texas and where my dad's family is, they're also pretty successful, right? Even when I worked at my first job and I got a random, like at these large companies, that there's like a central messaging system, and then suddenly I got a random message from someone with my last name saying, "Hey, are you related to so and so?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." And so like even bumping into people who happen to be my relative, they're also engineers, they're also doing well, and they didn't live in Alaska. We've all kind of come from the South, right? My the first person of the patriarch of my family is like one of 3 brothers who came from Haiti, and they're all pretty successful. Almost everyone with my last name that I found is successful. Like there's a famous journalist. Even I found someone who wrote a book on software engineering anti-patterns, right? Anytime I bump into someone I don't even know personally, they're
Is
successful.
it in the genes?
Maybe. But like we all haven't had the same experience, but
Well, you know what's crazy about that though is that I've got friends who are racialized Black who are on the far left, and they constantly say that there's systems in place to keep them from making money or from succeeding, and it's kind of weird because it's like, yeah, but every single racialized Black person I know is incredibly successful. So what's your freaking excuse?
I feel like people are trying to make an excuse for maybe, I mean, unfortunately, like maybe there was something that was missing from their life, but they cannot make the claim that it's something that's systematically missing from all of the other racialized Black people's lives.
Right, because it would have to apply to everybody equally, and it doesn't. It's obvious that it doesn't.
And you know, like let's say if there is someone who's not fiscally educated, right? They're not from a family that knows how to handle money. And logic goes, they're also living in a neighborhood where other people don't know how to handle their money either. So yeah, I understand that they're living with a perception of, well, everyone I know doesn't know this, therefore, and we're all X race, right? Therefore, this must be a common trait, but they're not actually, it's a sampling bias. They're not actually meeting people who do know that, who are also Black, and like, oh wait, if I knew this, actually things will be better. Right. But it's a lack of awareness and a lack of exposure to different people and different types of ideas, and knowing, oh, this is how you can use these things. Like, you know,
funny how that sampling bias and that confirmation bias kind of go hand in hand really well, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it's no wonder, you know, even if you look at, you know, people who live in a trailer park, right? They're less likely to know someone who's rich, or if they do maybe know someone who's rich, it seems like there might be a veil of like, oh, well, they must have scammed or done something. They're not,
their parents are rich.
Or like they don't actually know that, like, you actually have to know enough to keep your wealth, right? Like, you look at all those people who won the lottery, and, you know, like years later, their whole family's messed up, or they, like, most of the money is gone. They've spent their money on things that, they spent their money on things that don't, give you money long term. Like they suddenly got like a Lamborghini that like depreciates the moment you drive it off the lot, or like they spend a lot of money on a house that, yeah, a huge chunk of their money is spent, but they can't pay their property taxes long term. So it's stuff like that you have to be conscious of, that will teach you how to spend your money wisely. And even if you look at, like this is something I even learned in The Great Gatsby, right? Where it's the difference between old money and new money, right? New money just spends, have all these lavish parties, but old money, they're like more reserved. And that is a trait of how people maintain their wealth, is that they don't spend it on any frivolous thing.
Old money, they only spend about a quarter of what they actually earn. Yeah. That's it. That's total. The rest goes into savings and then investments.
Yeah. And you have to, like my dad always told me, make your money work for you. Right. And so if you never understand like what a high yield savings account is, or how to invest, or like just basic, like, index funds or something like that, stuff that, I was exposed to very young, that it's not a huge hurdle for me to understand those concepts. But some people, it's a completely new concept, and they're overwhelmed by that fact. But then, then they have to, in order to kind of absolve themselves of like, oh, I could have done something this whole time, but something was keeping that knowledge away from me. But no, nothing really was.
I wonder what that's like for you, Charles. What is finances like for you in Nigeria? It's got to be much different than here in the U.S.
Well, put that in a better context. What exactly do you mean by what is finances like?
Well, like, do you guys have a credit system? Like we have the credit bureaus. It's a social credit system, but we have a credit system, which means that if you want to buy a house, you have to get your credit pulled. Your credit's got to be above a certain level, and then they approve you for the loan, and then you've got to prove income and employment and all these other verifications that you have to go through. Plus, you have bank accounts. Even in some places, you have to have a credit pull in order to get a bank account. It's kind of ridiculous, but yeah, I'm just kind of
Well,
wondering what finances are like
that's
in
the
your
difference.
country.
That's the difference between the Western world and my country currently. Most people pay for things that they have with cash, either from the salaries or from monies they've saved up. Very rarely do people use loans to do things. If someone wants to have a house, they're most likely going to start building the house. You know, they build till they get it. They want to buy a car, they save up for it and buy the car. So most people don't usually go to the banks except big businesses. Big businesses can go to the banks to get loans and all that, but everyday Nigerians, for schooling, for every other life needs, most people just, if they have to borrow, they can borrow from their friends and family and all that. But there is no credit system. You don't need we don't have a credit system that determines. We don't use credit cards here. No, we don't use credit cards.
That's
We only
crazy.
have debit cards. So you only spend what you have in your account. You can't spend forward. But some banks currently are giving they have some packages where you can be loaned money in advance. You can maybe your salary advance. They know you're working. They've assessed that
Yeah.
you're receiving your salary in this account, so you
Yeah,
can
we got
actually
those
take
too.
a salary advance, and once your salary comes, you pay it back. Or you can be loaned a certain amount which would be taken from your salary every month, depending on either 12 months. There are different rates, 12 months or 6 months, different rates.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's the most that's available to ordinary Nigerians. But barring that, every other thing people get to do with cash.
Yeah, that's
They
crazy
just pay
because
for it.
like here I've got, well, let me see here. My availability to credit, given all my credit cards and my mortgage, I've probably got access to about $150,000 that I could really pull together if I really needed to, or if I just wanted to, I could pull it. But that takes paying the credit cards, that takes me paying off a second mortgage if that's what I do. But I do have that availability though. So I'm interested in how you guys look at wealth in that way.
Okay, in terms of mortgage and all that. Sorry,
Like
I
just
was
availability to wealth, I should say.
availability to wealth. Well, my country is an anomaly in the sense that we shouldn't be poor because of our huge natural resources, our huge population, and so many other things. Uh, but we have been plagued with bad leaders that
Yeah.
yeah, that's our plague: corruption and nepotism and all that. So there's there are challenges with so many things in terms of maybe roads, in terms of electricity, in terms of, in fact, it's that bad that every Nigerian has to almost provide those things for themselves. So, for example, many Nigerians have their own backup generators. So, if the light is not good, businesses run their generators. They don't have to depend on the government electricity to run their businesses. Neighborhoods have to have their own security outfits to protect their communities because you can't really rely so much on the police to show up when needed. You understand? Um, Water, people provide their own water for themselves. We have boreholes, people just drill into the ground and provide water for themselves. There's a water board, there's a general water board, but I doubt if up to 1% of people make use of the water board. It was popular
You're
when I was much younger, but now
Yeah.
people provide their own
you're
water.
living in
So
the libertarian utopia, man.
Yeah. Well,
that's
that's
why
like how it is in
Nigerians, that's why
Austria.
Nigerians, that's why Nigerians don't understand socialism because we're already used to providing so much of these things for ourselves. And when we come to the West and we see that, oh, the government is even doing all this, you just shoot and you be like, well, this is easy because back
Spoiled.
home
Yeah.
you
Bro,
have to you
we
have
can't
to
even
do all
collect
those things.
rainwater here.
Well, it depends on the state, right? But yeah, in Alaska, that's normal. Like we had well water, right? And even here, my dad's place, he spent money out of pocket to put solar panels on his roof, right? And so, you know, he calls it like off the grid living, and that's kind of even my mindset, right? Even, you know, I'm thinking about building a place where I want to move to, and I have to consider, you know, well water, septic, solar, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'll have a hookup to, you know, the not to the like public water or sewage, but like to the power. But yeah, that's my mindset of like, you can't necessarily depend. It's better if you don't need to depend on someone else. But kind of even getting back to the whole credit stuff, I think it definitely, it's a really weird situation in the United States, and I've had many conversations with my friends about this, is that your credit score improves the more debt you have.
Yep.
Right? If you are really good with money and you're able to pay for everything in cash, you have no credit history. And
Yep.
therefore you have a low credit score because you haven't used your credit. And so there, I feel like it encourages people to take on debt. And so if you have debt and then you're paying out very much, then your credit score is really high. Because for me, because I did have a car loan and I had a mortgage, but when I paid both of those off, my credit score tanked. It because like, well, you don't have these credits anymore. I'm like, I did something good. I paid it off. I actually paid it off. I paid both of them off early, and my credit score suffered. And when my friend, you know, she bought a new car, her credit score went up.
Yeah.
So it's a backwards system in which I think it inherently encourages a certain level of consumerism, and of course that's
It does.
they want to
Yeah.
encourage Americans to spend as much as possible, maybe spend more than what you make, because that generates more stimulation in the economy. But I don't think that that's a long-term real solution. I
Yeah.
understand having a loan for a house, but you know, putting a vacation on your credit card, no. Like, I don't see having loans for things that are not going to earn you wealth in the future. A house, yeah, you can have equity in it and it can increase in value, but like a vacation that you had last year and you're still paying it off,
Yeah.
that's doing nothing for you.
Yep.
So, guys, it's been a very good close to 2 hours, 30 minutes. I think this is a good place for us to end the conversation today. It's 1:33 here. I need to catch some sleep. I need to go to work tomorrow. So it's good. It's good to have talked with you guys. Good to have seen Chloe in person. And we're going to
Yeah.
be doing this more. No more cameras off.
The era is over.
So thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much, Chloe. So anything more from you guys before we end for today?
No, I'm good, man. I'm just grateful for
good.
the opportunity to be here and to be able to talk to Bob, and I appreciate the invitation. Really do.
Yeah, it was great. It was awesome.
Yeah. Say hello to your dad for us, Chloe.
I will.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Have a great day/night. Bye.
All right. Bye.
All right, we'll see ya.